The Verdict, Episode 1. Genghis Khan, the most destructive man in history or the most misunderstood. He killed so many people that scientists say he single-handedly cooled the Earth's temperature. He conquered more land than any man in history, and yet some historians call him one of the greatest leaders who ever lived. Today on The Verdict, we put Genghis Khan on trial. Born around 1162 on the steppes of Mongolia, Temujin, the man who would become Genghis Khan, did not have an easy start. His father was poisoned when he was 9. His family was abandoned by their tribe and left to starve. As a teenager, he was enslaved. Most people in his position would have disappeared into history. He didn't. Through a combination of brilliant military strategy, political cunning, and sheer ruthlessness, Temujin united the warring Mongol tribes, something no one had ever managed to do. And in 1206, he was declared Genghis Khan, universal ruler. What followed was one of the most violent and most transformative conquests in human history. Let's start with the prosecution. The numbers are staggering. Historians estimate that Genghis Khan's campaigns killed between 40 and 70 million people. That was roughly 10% of the entire world's population at the time. Cities that refused to surrender were wiped off the map. The city of Nishapur in modern-day Iran, population over 100,000, was reportedly massacred so completely that the Mongols stacked the skulls into pyramids. The Silk Road cities of Central Asia, Samarkand, Merv, Baghdad, were ancient centers of learning and trade. Many were burned to the ground. Entire civilizations were erased. The Islamic Golden Age, a period of extraordinary scientific and cultural achievement, was effectively ended by the Mongol invasion. Libraries burned, scholars killed, centuries of knowledge lost. By any modern definition, what Genghis Khan unleashed was genocide, and the environmental impact. So many agricultural societies were destroyed that forests regrew over farmland, measurably dropping CO2 levels in the atmosphere. That is the scale of the destruction. But the prosecution doesn't stop there. In 1258, Genghis Khan's grandson, Hulagu Khan, completed what his grandfather had started. He sacked Baghdad, the capital of the Abbasid Caliphate and the intellectual heart of the Islamic world. The House of Wisdom, one of the greatest libraries ever assembled, was destroyed. Scholars say that so many books were thrown into the Tigris River that the water ran black with ink. 500 years of Islamic philosophy, mathematics, astronomy, and medicine gone in days. The caliph himself was executed. The symbolic head of Sunni Islam, a line stretching back to the Prophet, was ended. The psychological and spiritual damage to the Islamic world was incalculable. And then there's the question of infrastructure. Across Persia and Mesopotamia, the Mongols systematically destroyed the ancient Qanat irrigation systems, underground channels that had sustained agriculture for thousands of years. When those systems were wrecked, the land turned to desert. Farmland that had fed millions became dust. Some historians estimate that the population of Iran didn't recover to its pre-Mongol levels for nearly 700 years, 7 centuries. That is not a military defeat. That is a civilizational wound. There's one more charge the prosecution must raise, and it's perhaps the most chilling of all. Genghis Khan used terror as deliberate strategy. The massacres were not side effects of war. They were the point. Cities that surrendered were spared. Cities that resisted were annihilated. Every skull pyramid, every burned library, every slaughtered population sent the same message to the next city on the list: submit or disappear. It worked, but what does it say about a man who turned genocide into a military doctrine? And the consequences didn't stop with him. Historians believe that the vast Mongol trade network, the very same network that connected East and West, also became the highway for the bubonic plague. The Black Death, which originated in Central Asia, traveled west along Mongol roads and trade routes in the 14th century. It killed between 30 and 60% of Europe's population. Genghis Khan didn't create the plague, but the empire he built carried it to the world. But here's where history gets complicated, because the same man who ordered those massacres also built something remarkable. At a time when Europe was mired in feudalism and religious persecution, the Mongol Empire was, surprisingly, one of the most tolerant empires in the world. Genghis Khan guaranteed freedom of religion across his empire. He didn't care whether you were Muslim, Christian, Buddhist, or shamanist. As long as you submitted to Mongol rule, you were free to worship as you pleased. He established one of the first international postal systems, the Yam, a relay network of horse stations that allowed messages to travel thousands of miles in days. He codified laws. He promoted based on merit, not birth. Conquered peoples could rise to become generals and governors in his empire. And the Pax Mongolica, the Mongol peace, that followed his conquests connected east and west in ways never seen before. Trade flourished. Ideas traveled. Some historians argue the Mongol Empire laid the groundwork for the Renaissance. Marco Polo traveled to China because of the Mongol road network. The printing press, gunpowder, and paper money all moved westward through Mongol trade routes. Now, the defense has more to add. Consider women. In 13th century Europe, women had almost no legal rights. In much of the Islamic world, women were largely confined to domestic roles. But in Mongol society, women could own property, divorce their husbands, and even participate in governance. Genghis Khan's own mother, Holin, was one of the most powerful figures in the early empire. His wives held court, managed territories, and shaped policy. The Mongol world wasn't feminist by modern standards, but it was revolutionary by medieval ones. Then there's trade. Genghis Khan offered something remarkable: safe passage and legal protection for merchants across the entire empire. If a merchant was robbed or killed within Mongol territory, the state was obligated to compensate them. He essentially created the world's first international free trade zone, stretching from the Pacific Ocean to the borders of Europe. This wasn't charity. It was visionary economics. Trade meant tax revenue. Protected merchants meant more trade. The result was an interconnected commercial network that no empire before had ever achieved. And here's something few people know. Genghis Khan was, in many ways, the inventor of diplomatic immunity. Harming an ambassador was punishable by death under Mongol law. Envoys were untouchable. In fact, one of the primary reasons Genghis Khan launched his devastating campaign against the Khwarezmian Empire was because its Shah had murdered his trade envoys, a crime Genghis Khan considered unforgivable. The idea that diplomats must be protected is now a cornerstone of international law. It was Genghis Khan who enforced it with a ferocity no one else dared. And finally, consider the long shadow he cast on humanity itself. Scientists estimate that approximately 16 million men alive today carry the Y chromosome of Genghis Khan. About 0.5% of every man on Earth is a direct descendant. No other individual in recorded history has left a genetic footprint anything like it. Was that by choice, by conquest, or by the sheer scale of his world? All three. But it speaks to something undeniable about the reach of this one man's life. So, what's the verdict? Genghis Khan was not a misunderstood hero. The deaths of tens of millions of people cannot be explained away or romanticized. The destruction of Baghdad, the burning of libraries, the collapse of irrigation systems that took millennia to build, the psychological scarring of entire civilizations. These are not footnotes. They are the central fact of his legacy. But he was also not simply a monster. He was a product of a brutal world who built something that, for all its violence, transformed human civilization. The connections he forged between continents shaped the modern world in ways we still feel today. The religious tolerance, the trade networks, the protection of diplomats, the promotion by merit. In these ways, the Mongol Empire was, paradoxically, ahead of its time. The verdict? Genghis Khan was the most consequential person of the medieval world, a man of extraordinary contradiction, capable of both unimaginable destruction and remarkable vision. He could build a postal system spanning continents and burn the greatest library on Earth. He could elevate women in ways Europe wouldn't manage for centuries and order the massacre of hundreds of thousands. He could protect diplomats by law and execute 1 million people for the actions of one Shah. History rarely gives us villains or heroes, it gives us humans. And Genghis Khan was one of the most human figures who ever lived. What do you think? Was Genghis Khan the greatest conqueror in history, or history's greatest monster? Drop your verdict in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe to The Verdict, because next time we're putting another giant of history on trial. And remember, history isn't black and white, that's why we're here.